So yeah, the situation is not like a really deep philosophical design question or anything like that,
We're kind of
but
past that at this point.
yeah, it's so I was working on a mechanic for uh, replacement characters for after your character dies. Trying to have something cool for replacement characters to do, but the situation I'm running into is uh, depending on how I do it, I keep getting stuck between two alternatives, and I'm having a hard time finding the balance. I'm either creating a system that rewards uh, keeping a character alive for a long time, so that way the replacement character is more powerful based on how long the existing character survived. So that kind of rewards
Right.
successful play.
So you get
Rewards
something
successful.
good with your new character, but on the other hand, that doesn't mean wax characters left and right because you won't get as
Yeah,
much that's good. Go on. Uh huh.
right. But then that means that players that are struggling and unlucky will be significantly weaker than players who have managed to keep a character alive for a significant amount of
In
time to
other words, yeah,
accommodate.
you're introducing a diversity in current character power. I mean, in other
Yeah,
words, if we were only dealing with one player, then that solution sounds great. It's a great trade
yeah.
off. It's a great, you know. Okay, well, this is where we take a look at the the roles of people relative to one another. This is one of those play variables that I have never really codified out, and I'm beginning to create kind of a lexicon for that. The experience of play. And to what extent is your capacity to do things important? And the answer is we know it is important. It's perhaps possible to be a little too obsessed with every character having precisely the same effectiveness no matter what. But on the other hand, if we're going to have characters with very distinct differences in effectiveness, then uh, we have to have a reason
Mhm.
or ways of being distinctive that are at least fun to consider. Let's consider something. I have a bit of terminology regarding characters' presence in play. They're real easy. You use these terms all the time yourself in one fashion or another, so it's not exotic. But let's consider the characters' batteries of all kinds, whether they're energy, whether they're hits, whether they are number of arrows, whatever it is, anything that is a resource that gets used, possibly replenished, maybe not. So far, so good. That's anything like that,
Mhm.
all of them.
Mhm.
Then we have over here anything which is an indicator of how much impact they have on others. Particularly, I mean, in traditional gaming, you'll have like your chance to hit is an excellent example, but you have lots and lots of other things. All the different resolution tasks, things they can do, even ones without rolls. Just the fact that they can do them at all for this character is part of that set. So that's kind of your effectiveness stuff. Um, then third is the trickiest one. I call it positioning. Ever since I used that word, it's been co-opted into God knows how many different thoughts. But the basic idea being the uh, built-in set-up relationship of the character to any other character and anything that indicates that.
Mhm.
Um, the there are a few things that we can find that are formal in some games about that. Sometimes social status is a score of some kind, um, or like that trust mechanic that we talked about in the Mountain Witch is another good example of how the characters are positioned relative to each other in certain things. But a lot of the time that's more qualitative and is baked into like homeland descriptions or racial descriptions. These guys don't really like those guys, that kind of stuff. If we have that, one thing that I proposed a long time ago is that these things actually have relationships to one another, even if they're not quantified. If you're playing a game like GURPS, these things are actually quantified. So many points in social status, so many points in, in wealth, and then wealth sets up how many arrows you're going to have, and all kinds of stuff are very, very, and then how strong you are. It's all built with the same points. And it made those and similar games led me to think that these things are related for any role-playing game in ways that are effectively quantitative, or at least very substantial during play. Even if they're not codified with points in a given game, they still have a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look at this character over here and say, oh, this one's kind of bulked up in all the effectiveness, and this one's kind of bulked up on all the resources, and you can kind of get an interesting profile of a character at this very generalist level. What I'm trying to say is this. You may have resources, you may have aspects of a character to emphasize when you bring them in as a replacement character that are, that might help solve your problem. In other words, you're not dealing with the same variables. If your first characters have a particular arrangement of those things, the characters you bring in can be built on a different kind of arrangement of those things. And that means that you might not be as effective. Let's say a person has a character who dies, pretty early. So the character they bring in is, well, that's the question. They bring in the character who's relatively weak-ish. You see, I'm not sure I get this. Hold on a second. Right? We've got two people. This person plays their character for a long time, and then their character bites the dust and they get a replacement character.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's a person who plays a character, bad luck, bites the dust, shoot, gets a replacement character. Now, who did benefit that much, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then the plays a little longer, and to the hilarity of all present, this player, character 2 bites the dust. And shoot, the player, being a good sport, goes, okay, and then gets the replacement character, who benefits both from the initial bit, and benefits from the next bit. So has two doses has basically a dose of benefit, maybe just a single dose from the second character. So I guess it's based on the last character before you died. And so I guess what you're saying, if that happens multiple times, that character only ever comes in with this much advance.
Right.
Whereas this one comes in with this much advance.
Right.
This whole thing.
And then, yes, that's the problem. And then the flip side is if I don't base the replacement character advance on how well your previous character did, then you are in fact rewarding dying early and dying often, because then you're unlocking abilities every time you die. Right,
exactly. And so the other point about that is that that basically who the character is each time becomes relatively disposable if all you're doing is just advancing. So yeah, you do have a little bit of a conundrum there, and perhaps our whole approach is a little bit wrong-headed. And we should think instead of those three angles that I was talking about and say, all right, what if when your character dies, you bring in a new character who is appropriate for not anything except that stage of play? And you would probably rate that. You already have a rating for the stage of play, right? The number of successes regarding the realm.
Yeah.
You already have it.
Yeah.
So if your character dies, the character you're bringing in comes in right there. Now, That means that if you are careless with your characters and keep knocking them off, you actually aren't benefiting very much. Maybe we can keep the unlocking idea open because that was kind of cool, but you're unlocking what that level of play can do.
Right.
And nothing else. And let's not forget that you do have improvement of a character too. You see, you do have the improvement of a character if they live. That happens too. So you, therefore, keeping your character going and enjoying how they are changing and all the ways that they can improve isn't nothing. And so if they die, the replacement is coming in, not based on how long the previous character lived, but based on what situation with successes right now.
Right.
And that helps a little bit with the quantitative side. Now, as far as the qualitative side is concerned about those different things, it may well be worth considering that the new character coming in isn't going to keep enough. Let's say effectiveness. Okay, let's just take it as a possibility that what you're improving in as you keep your character and keep going through adventures is your effectiveness. I pick that because that's typically the most obvious and common kind of advancement.
Right.
It's not the only kind because, hit points, but, in many games, especially ones that don't beef up hit points into 10,000, they're going to focus on, I get better at hitting things with my sword. Right. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and say, all right, well, when the replacement character comes in and they get their effectiveness, they actually aren't going to be really effective. Maybe they're busted all the way back to the beginning in terms of effectiveness.
Right.
But in terms of one of those other things, positioning or resources, and of course, those break down into 10,000 variables, right? And let's not forget that in a given game, those boundaries can be linked through a given mechanic. I'm not saying that they have to be separate mechanics, but they are separate things. So what I'm saying is, okay, so I'm playing my guy, and I fight hard with him, and the character advances, and I'm liking the way the character is advanced, and we've made it through. We've got a handful of successes in Defense of the Realm. We're not winning yet, that's for sure, but we can say we've done a thing or two. And we haven't, completely, it's a good thing we left our gardens and our homes and our castles and went off to go do this. We actually have struck a blow here and there. So We've got that. So then we do this, and then my character, sadly, despite my best efforts, despite the best efforts of my comrades and all the rest of it, and quite fairly, given the fact that we are up against, evil, is killed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I bring in a new character, and yes, this character relative to my character is a beginner. Just look at those effectiveness scores. Now, truly a beginner? Maybe not. Maybe the number of successes is giving them a little jump on a starting character.
Mm-hmm.
But relative to where I was, no, not that good. So, however, looking at that number of successes, this character has resources that my character didn't start with, of one kind or another.
Maybe and that's
right. Maybe they're yeah. Go ahead. Yeah,
I was gonna say that's exactly where I was working at. Was I have some very literal resources in my game.
Right.
I have energy points that are used to power all your different maneuvers. And then I also have heroic points, which are like a success currency.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So when I was creating this idea of mantles, the idea was the mantles would give you extra energy points for certain types of actions, and then a bonus way to earn heroic points that was very thematic to what the
that actually works pretty well, because that way you get your new character, and their effectiveness isn't great, but the number of successes you've earned so far is at least going to help. And then not only that, but you're also going to inherit, if you will, the mantle. And it's much more in terms of luck and energy than it is in terms of skill. Your new guy I find that rather satisfying.
Yeah.
No new guy. You do not get to be as good as Bob. Bob was awesome, and he earned every point of his of his increased skill.
Right.
You don't get to be that good. On the other hand, we do understand that you're coming in the middle and you're not as good, and we all kind of get it thematically that you're going to be a bit luckier.
Yeah.
We get that. Does that work, especially if you use the number of successes so far as kind of as your basic quantitative guide rather than longevity of the prior character?
Yeah, I think that does work. I think I just got to figure out. I think I got to figure out an easy way to boil down, because like the success tracks I have, there's basically a heroic success track and then like a evil success track.
Right.
And then whichever one fills up first ends the game.
Yeah. I see.
And then there's a bunch of like slots on each one. So like if I was dealing with, low increments, like 5 successes is the end of the game, then I could be like, hey, each success is how many energy points your new character starts with. But in reality, I think the track is 13 points.
Right.
It would be crazy. Right. So like I have to deal with some sort of way to interpret that into
that's true.
Scale.
Something tells me that that's going to involve some, I don't want to say painful, but it's going to involve playtesting with a system that you're not sure is the right one. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's always tough. You tell your playtesters, I'm trying a thing. And they're all like, oh no. Oh man.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the only kind of downside. But on the other hand, it's good to know what your point of interest is. And it also is worth thinking about that even 13 is not 30.
Right.
13 is not 50. It's not a percentage, right? 100 points. It's not a percentile phenomenon. So therefore, it could be worse. And who knows? It could be nicely graded. I mean, in the earlier stages, the character who comes in that gets more luck. In later stages of success, if you have a replacement character, they come in with more resource instead. At 10 through 13, maybe you come in and you'll have a bit of both. See what I mean? You can parse it a little bit differently, so it's not just a raw increase going up.
Right.
So that means you have combos to work with, and it can be a little bit less stressful, in terms of, I keep thinking of the chart in DC Heroes, which is a magnificent artifact of anything and everything that could fictionally happen or be rated in their action points. And I mean, this is a chart from some dimension, from some metaphysical realm that is truly impressive, of all of the things you could imagine, like, from Krypton to a football, and every event, every distance, every speed, every, difficulty, and it's rated in action points. I'm not mocking this chart. DC Heroes is a shockingly rational game design. I have my criticisms, but the chart is really, truly well thought out. And so what I'm saying, though, is that it takes a certain amount of... It takes a special sort of mind to want to do that.
Yeah.
And the actual benefit, aside from the beauty of it as an artifact, is questionable. So it might be worth thinking about the different variables that you've got, like energy points, heroic points, maybe a couple of other things. Who knows? Other kinds of positioning, other kinds of resource, like things that starting characters don't have at all. perhaps.
Hmm.
But instead of just beefing the characters with more and more and more and more of them as you go up, I mean, replacement characters, I mean, instead you have sort of sectors, maybe like 1 through 3, 4 through 6, then 7 through 9, 10 through 12, and 13. Right? They see what I mean? See what I did there?
Yeah.
And the idea being that I don't know if that's really actually the best idea, but the point being, though, that at these sectors, you're getting specific combinations of these different kinds of things. Maybe in the beginning, all you get is luck. In the new, as a new character. You're just lucky. You come in and you're basically a beginning character who's a little luckier than the beginning characters were. And that's it. Next sector, maybe it's a different thing entirely. And that way you can kind of avoid the need to have a smooth scale all the way up to 13.
Right.
So if you do want a scale of some kind, you would do it within a sector. Like, for these 3 levels, has its own little progression of those things. Does that maybe help a little? Kind of take a little of the heat off?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I think the decision is, I think I'm going to base the replacement character scale off of the number of dark points that have been scored.
Right. That's a good idea. How bad are we losing? Yeah. Okay.
Because it doesn't really make if you're in the lead
if we're winning, well, right? Yeah, big deal. Yeah. No, it's how badly you're losing. It's how dark it's getting, right? It's how it's quite interesting. I find that quite compelling, as a matter of fact. You might get quite the saga of the changes in our band, in our Fireforged band. How have we changed? Who have we lost and remember? Who have we who have we gained? What did they bring that no one else could have brought?
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Well, cool, Dustin. It's kind of nice to be able to raise variables and issues and then watch you do the wheel turning and decide, what you want. I think it's very enjoyable to
cool.
participate
Thank
in
you.
that. Yeah.